Okay, so we'll do the cardinal virtues, and then, as I said, we will wind up with the little narration on Francis Thompson's a modern adaptation of the Hound of Heaven, and then I'll have a short intro into that. So we call them the cardinal virtues because it's the Latin word for hinge. So many of the things hinge off of these. The Catechism tells us these virtues are attitudes, they're stable dispositions. They perfect our intellect and will. They govern our actions, and they control our passions. So this is how we become free. That's really what it means. This is how we become free. Modern world does not understand that. Remember, freedom is the ability to do that which you were designed to do. Typically, virtue only deals with people. I said that. Although analogously, I think it's Aristotle that said like a knife could be virtuous if it cuts well, because it's doing that which it's designed to do, right? But that's only analogous. A dog would be virtuous if it were well behaved and trained. Now, I'm going to explain what this is, and I'm only going to burden you with going through one of the virtues so you get how this is split up. But there's a virtue proper, and then there are subjective, potential, and integral parts to each virtue. Thomas Aquinas sat in a room for 5 years, and he thought of everything.
You had the internet.
Is he the founder of virtues?
No.
Or they were,
That came from the ancient Greeks. So Thomas Aquinas, in being introduced to Aristotle, had spent some time working this out. But he also obviously infused not just the church fathers and church teachings, but he infused Christian understandings into it. So the Greeks would not have understood love and faith and hope like we understand. But these cardinal virtues, they get them. All right, they would have came right out of that. So subjective virtues are real virtues, species to a genus. And Aquinas says they're real virtues because they can satisfy the definition. But they differ because they're ordered to very specific ends or goods. If that doesn't make sense to you, just wait till I show you the subjective parts of prudence. You're going to say, oh, I know exactly what that means. It really is simple. Potential virtues, they too are real virtues. Without them, the virtue would never be attained. Right? So they are real virtues, though they exist in some analogous way. They don't have the full power of a virtue. Again, when you see an example, it makes sense. Cesario's book, the guy's a genius. It's a little tough reading here and there. I tried to put it into a framework that we'll be able to understand. Integral virtues, they're also known as quasi-virtues. They are not real virtues. They are simply activities or psychological dispositions. They aid the virtue. They may need to be present for the virtue to come into fruition. But they are not virtues themselves. Okay, let's take a look at the first cardinal virtue. And those are the Greek and Latin words for them. So prudence is not, what was it, George Bush Sr.? That wouldn't be prudent. Wasn't that his line? Okay, it doesn't mean careful. Okay, it is right reason applied to an action. And you can see from the Summa, the second part of the second part, question 47, article 4. This is the mother of all virtues. So without this one, none of the other virtues will remain in existence very long. He says it is to moral virtue as reason is to appetite. So what does reason do with appetite? It governs it, it directs it, it constricts it, right? So prudence is necessary as that to all moral virtues. Without this, just like, again, those people that are sexual deviants in Dante's hell. They are in the second circle. Remember right? Fifth canto, second circle. What happens is they float, okay? Because they couldn't control their appetites and desires in life. So now they just float and they're guided by the wind for all eternity. But because that was something that was very natural to the human person, it's not as bad as other things like being a traitor. He puts lawyers in the farther end down. Anything that goes against reason, like violence too. People who are violent would be lower. And it's the way he works it out. But subjective parts of prudence. Individual prudence. Do you manage your life well? Do you see how they're species to a genus? Right? Domestic. Do you manage your family well? Do you have domestic prudence? Political and such. And then kingly. Do we execute justice well on earth? I just started watching the series Tudors. I don't know if anybody had seen it. There's nothing on PBS for me and my wife to watch, and I found it at a pawn shop the first season. So I go to pawn shops. You get videos for $1. You can't beat that. But here you have King Henry VIII, and he's in council with Thomas More, and also Wolsey, the rotten cardinal. So More and Wolsey are talking, and Wolsey says, if you want to garnish the king's favor, then you have to give up whatever it is that you love most. And he says to Thomas More, what do you love most? And he says, my integrity. We all know the answer to that, right? He refused to give it up. But Thomas tried to tell Henry VIII, did you read my Utopia? He says, I prefer Machiavellian's The Prince, right? You use any means possible to maintain your, kingship. So obviously not prudent, right? He prefers violence and intimidation rather than prudence. The potential parts of prudence. Now, the reason why this is important, this is how you form your conscience. So conscience formation is done by following potential parts of prudence. You start out with counsel, and this could be a long time. Now, sometimes you'll see there might be 5 parts to this, but I've just kept them to 3. It's simpler. But you would spend a long time trying to figure out, what should I do here? Maybe should I take this job? Well, I don't know. Well, honey, what do you think about this? Well, it is an increase of pay, but it's also going to be more time away. I'm not sure. It's not as secure as the one I have, right? You start to seek all these things. You might talk to people who left their, hometowns. How was it for you? You might go to the town where you were thinking of moving. What's it like here? So you're seeking all this advice, and the longer you spend in that particular subjective potential part, the better you are. Then you make a judgment, yay or nay, and it's usually immediately followed by the command. I'm now going to go and do it. So conscience and prudence are pretty much lined up together when we're talking about the potential parts. The integral parts, remember, these don't have the power of a virtue on their own, right? So we would not say memory is a virtue. But without memory, how are we going to form certain decisions in our life and make judgments? Intuition, facility, acumen. Not everybody has really good acumen, and that's not their quality. Foresight, circumspection, caution, which is typically what we think of in our modern vocabulary with prudence. We think to be prudent is to be cautious, but cautious is simply an integral part of the virtue. So yes, there's a connection there, but they're not synonyms, right? So even though that book could be kind of dense, Cesario, it's really a great textbook. If a person wants to form themselves and become more prudent, then we already know, what are some of the things that I'm going to have to really focus on? First of all, I'm going to have to be docile. I'm going to have to be almost humble before the truth and other people. I'm going to have to, why not ask for the gift of memory and such? And then I'll go out and seek counsel, whatever it is I'm trying to make a decision on before I reach my judgment and command. Now, what's nice about the virtue of prudence is that the more you form a habit, the more it becomes your stable disposition. So If you don't know what a prudent thing is to do, Thomas Aquinas gives advice. Go ask a prudent person, right? So that's why we seek out wise people in our lives, because they are more stable in their disposition. If we wish to be more stable, then we need to practice this more. So what happens, though, is that if you are in a more stable position, depending on what we're talking about, you don't really need to spend a lot of time on counsel. And especially if it's an emergency situation, you're going to move right through it. You're going to go right to judgment and command. You know, especially with things that you've already determined. Like, fools go where angels fear to dread. Is that how it goes? Something like that. Tread. What did I say, dread? Okay, you heard what I was thinking. My wife's very good at that. So why? Because you've already understood. And by the way, this is where you have to understand that a person who doesn't know what the right thing to do is, and you're seeking the good advice, you're not following that blindly. You are seeking out prudence. That's actually part of counsel. So, like for young people who may not have developed their own political savvy, what do? They usually vote the way their parents do, or the opposite, depending on how obstinate they are. But if they vote the way their parents do, somebody might make fun of them. Think for yourself. You know, I've had 2 employees once, and they were going back and forth, and you know, you got to think for yourself. You're 19 years old. Stop voting the way your parents thought. And I said, well, hold on a second now. I said, these aren't strangers. These are people that have formed this young person, and they love them. It's not exactly a lack of prudence to follow their advice. It might be a lack of prudence to not follow the advice. Okay, now if you're 30 years old and you still haven't developed some sort of identity, okay, we have an issue. But not at a young age. So let's think of this in terms of how somebody might accuse you or accuse somebody you're counseling about following the church's rules blindly. Well, have you thought of everything through? Maybe there are some things there that are just good, wise, sage advice. Just because you don't know the process that they use to get to that doesn't mean it's bad advice. And if you haven't yet developed the ability or the time or the intuition or docility or foresight to work through a particular situation, then yes, follow it. Does it seem like a rule? Well, it's not meant to be a rule, but see, rules do have a place. Because sometimes we just need to know the right thing to do when we don't have time to work through it ourselves. Okay, so you can see how, you know, virtue theory not just helps you, but it should be able to help you wherever you're going in your particular missions. So the vices that are contrary to prudence. Okay? Think of this like almost like in a counseling. Not that you would counsel them, but if you were giving somebody advice. You know, how are you with envy? I mean, if you're an envious person, you can only imagine, you know, how the domestic prudence is going to suffer. You know, especially if it's a sibling, right? Or anger, lust, duplicity, negligence. These are all things to overcome. So if a person wanted to do spiritual counseling, you can only imagine, you know, let's get to the base of this. Like I can't remember the one priest I was good friends with. He was an old sage redemptorist. He was 55 before he ever went into any particular parish. And then I might even joke with you, the first 2 parishes he was in, they turned it over to the diocese, so they ceased to be Redemptorist parish and became diocesan parishes. And to move them around, we called him the Grim Reaper. He was like the guy that went in and then they closed it after he left. But I remember talking to him once about something I was struggling with. And his advice, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it seemed so obscure at the time. But when I went home and thought about it, I thought, that son of a gun. You know, once I started thinking about it in terms of virtue theory, he found the vice that I was holding was contrary to whatever it was that fell under a particular virtue. But he wasn't being systematic like that. It's just his years of counseling and such. Now, false resemblances are, remember how I said C.S. Lewis used an illustration that we're easily fooled by brass thinking it's gold, more so than we are clay. And really early in this course, we said that there are particular counterfeits, like titillation instead of beauty. And I can't remember what it was instead of wisdom. But nonetheless, when something presents itself as a counterfeit, these things become very dangerous in our lives because we actually think we're being virtuous. And we don't realize we've been sold a bill of goods. Satan is a good liar. The lie is not 180 degrees. It's off the mark, right? So carnal prudence, let's just lump that in with craftiness, right? Now, if you had a lawyer, maybe you would like him to be crafty, but how far would you like him to bend things? I mean, if somebody were selling us something, like in sales, right? How far would we want them to go? We might say, hey, that was pretty, pretty crafty of you and such, but this craftiness could present itself, as prudence. Like, in other words, they've reasoned it through, but have they really used their wits to fool us and such? Unlawful solicitude and fear. So anyway, Thomas Aquinas says we just have to be on the lookout, because sometimes what we consider right action in the public sphere, in private life, or even in church life, it could be one of these false resemblances. And there you go. Remember C.S. Lewis's quote even about prosperity. I mean, who doesn't like to be prosperous in their lives? C.S. Lewis says in Screwtape Letters, he was chastising his young nephew, the devil. Stop wishing harm on them and trying to make them go into poverty. Let them be prosperous in the world. Let them be knit into the world, because then the world will be within them. So, okay, that's crafty on his part. That might present itself in our particular situation like, look what I got them to do. Isn't that something? Right? Nonetheless. Yeah.
Carnal prudence. What is that specifically?
I'm going to just leave that lumped in with craftiness, because every time I've tried to explain it, I wind up going right back to craftiness. It's just prudence, really particular to desires, let's say, of carnal desires, sex and food and such, right?
Okay.
That's how I'd put it. I'm sure that if I thought about it more or looked it back up in the Summa, and I have to tell you, that was the one thing I was hoping nobody would ask me, because I really couldn't think of it right now. That is funny. I'm just going to be honest. Yeah, there's always one of them. Are you the one going to Shamokin? Ask them.
I think there's a homily now.
Yes. Accuse them all of carnal prudence, and when they don't know what it is, you're probably doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, justice is to give another their due. Okay? And this is to give both God and neighbor their justice. So it is just to love and worship God. So we hear this in the liturgy. It is right and just. It is truly right and just. It is our duty and our salvation. Now, let's be clear on this. I got into an argument over one of the theses I wrote. I was making a case almost against this, and they kept bringing it up. And it is true, that we do these things that are just. But I don't like it when we start to think that's the motivation for it, right? So, if your children, after a lifetime of taking care of them, at least, throughout their 18, 20 years old, and then if they, out of respect, do something for you, it's right and just. But I would hope that their motivation is a return of love, right? So Thomas Aquinas puts, religion as one of the subjective parts underneath justice. That's something that we give back to God in justice. And it's true. And I'm not trying to say that we're mistaking in what we say in the liturgy, only the context that I would understand it. Let's not pretend that it's the simple motivation. So when we love and respect others, really, that is just, but let's be clear that it's reflecting, God's goodness. By the way, I guess I should have said it, the theological virtue of charity infuses all of these. Right? I mean, so you could not have justice without love. You could not have hope without love. You cannot have prudence without love. It infuses all of these. Justice governs the will. What are the vices contrary to, that should say to justice, not to faith. I must have been cutting and pasting and I forgot to overwrite it. Tale-bearing is telling things, if I remember right, that are not true. Okay? Calumny is telling things that are true, but the person has no right to that information. Hey, did you know Uncle John's a drunk? It might be perfectly true, got no business spreading that.
So, cardinal virtues, are they moral virtues or theological virtues?
Well, that's like a different breakup in a sense,
Okay.
but they would be moral virtues.
Which ones are?
The cardinal virtues would be moral virtues. And typically, faith, hope, and love are the theological virtues. I didn't use those clarifications because sometimes people then throw in intellectual virtues and it might be easy, it's just it confuses me. So derision then, is when you deride somebody, you break somebody down. And curing? No, something's wrong there.
Derision is?
Derision is when you're like tearing somebody down, okay? You're mocking them. What is that? Cursing.
Oh.
Missing an S. You're wishing evil on other people, okay? Wishing evil on other people.
And what was faith supposed to be?
Faith is justice. I forgot to take out that virtue. So, if people are, gossipers, this is a sin.
This is a cardinal virtue, right?
This is, oh my God, even that's wrong.
Is that right?
Yes, it's a cardinal virtue.
Okay, sorry.
I was off my camp on this. I'll have to fix that. So if somebody's spreading rumors, we can start to think in terms of, like, again, how do we frame this? We can start framing it that, this is not just other people. There's a story I heard, and I don't know where I heard it, but it's a really good illustration that a medieval person went to the priest to confess that they were spreading rumors. The priest said, fine, for your penance, I want you to grab a chicken and walk throughout the village, saying how sorry you are every time you pluck a feather. And then when the whole chicken is bare, come back to me. And they did. And he says, now what am I supposed to do? The priest said, I want you to go back now into the village and gather every feather that you plucked from the chicken. The man said, it's impossible. I'll never be able to collect that again. He says, that's what you've done. Do you understand your sin now? It wasn't just what you've done, because once it's left your mouth, whether it's tail-burning calumny or derision, right? Doesn't matter if it's true, you have no control over it. So you have created an injustice in this community, all right? And religion as a potential part of justice. I think I already mentioned that.
That was a new rumor. That guy's crazy. Walking around with a bald shape.
Yeah. That's the other half. Okay, and again, it should say cardinal virtues.
They're all cardinal.
They're all cardinal. I'm sorry. Now I get why you're asking the question.
He's on a roll back here.
I didn't notice that. So fortitude is the ability to endure a difficult good, right? So just think of us enduring it. Now, oftentimes people who are intolerant, lack fortitude. We can't always change everything, especially in our society. And if you're like me, you'll love complaining about it. It seems like it makes you feel better, at least for the moment, right? But we have to pray for an increase in fortitude. So there's red and white martyrdom. You've heard that. We not only could be killed for our faith, but we could also bear the burden of ridicule and such, which the church refers to as white martyrdom. These snide remarks that are caused on us. Even if it is that, you're not very intellectual, get rid of the superstition. How can you really belong to a church that has so much corruption in it? That type of thing. It could be, sometimes maybe we'll make a stand in our world by being courageous. And next week, if you, I'm not sure which one I gave you on Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
It's Harvard.
Yeah, I'm letting you finish the Russian name. He says that's what we lack. That's the virtue we lack in our modern world is courage. And we just will not stand up for what is right. This is difficult. It's very difficult. I don't know if you're like me. I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal. I've lost jobs. I have not gotten jobs, and I've turned away jobs. And maybe I wasn't prudent, and I mean that, maybe I didn't work through it right. Maybe I was overly cautious. But sometimes, you say what needs to be said, and I don't mean like my Polish chuchis would do all the time, but just the fact that, at this point, it needed to be said in a way that it was heard loud and clear, and because of that, you're ostracized, So fortitude governs the irascible appetites. There's the irascible and concupiscible. Right? So here it governs hope and despair, courage, fear, and anger. So think of it in terms, again, not mechanically, but if a person does lack strength, for whatever it might be, it could be that they lack the strength to make it through the death of a loved one. Then let's go back and talk again about what hope is, all right? Maybe they do need more courage to overcome the fear of maybe hearing about a particular, illness that they think hasn't been diagnosed yet or such. Sometimes, and again, these are gifts too. Like, these are virtues, but let's not forget, these are gifts that God could sustain within us. So to ask for more strength, because we always we ask to get out of the situation, right? But let's always remember to ask, if you're not bringing me out of it, God, please give me the strength to go through this. Vice is contrary to fortitude, and you can see this from the chart that I had, that table on the excess and deficiencies. Cowardice was a deficiency, and recklessness was the excess. But sloth isn't laziness. It's a religious type of laziness. It's almost like, it's one thing to not know exactly what the church understands and then to be opposed to it. It's another thing to not even care to find out what the church understands and to be opposed to it. Right? If you're going to be opposed to something, know what it is you're opposed to. And that's part of my story. It was like the one grace that kept me in the church. I didn't want to leave a church. And when somebody said, why did you leave the Catholic Church? I didn't have a good answer. I didn't want to just say it was because of this stupid thing or that stupid thing, because I didn't want to look stupid. So that little bit of pride kept me in long enough to investigate it. So it wasn't even my own prudence. I think it was my mother's being thrown at me. Vainglory, right? The bad type of pride. Pusillanimous, that I guess you could understand it as a contemptible fear, right? Or mock courage. I think I could have said what that was, Mike, before you asked me yesterday, and right now I can't think of what it is. But maybe just the resemblance of courage, right? Again, these are cardinal virtues. Temperance. Okay, if I haven't said it, and if I don't say it later, can't remember what I put down. These are hierarchical, okay? Temperance is at the bottom, which you can see it played out in Dante's Inferno. So, because temperance governs the things that we need, sex and food. So it's not like it has the higher functions of the intellect and such. So we'll call temperance properly ordered self-love. And now, instead of the irascible appetites like fear and hope and such, this does the concupiscible. So love and hatred, desire and aversion, joy and sadness. So an intemperate person, right, somebody who, refuses to enjoy foods, they can actually be losing joy. I mean, well, I'm saying it literally. And you really should find the movie Babette's Feast. Did I mention it to you before? It's one of Pope Francis's favorite movies. I think it's a Dutch film, so you're only going to find it in subtitles. But it's a wonderful story. I'll give you in the nutshell because it fits in here. There are these two spinster women, sisters, that grew up as the daughters of this, I don't mean cult in a bad way, but like a small, tight church, right? So it was almost like a Bible-believing church, and it was very close family, small village. In comes this woman who will then be the maid there and the cook. Little notes to anybody, she was this wonderful chef from Paris. And, but she's used to making just, dried fish, the most bland food, and she does so. But this particular group thinks that it's vanity to like the food. So they almost purposely, or they're intemperate, that's part of their spirituality. And it's a spiritual sickness, right? So the woman, I guess the way the lottery worked in France was that some relative would perpetually keep her name in the lottery, and she wins. And she wins enough that she can leave this place and go and go have the life that she wanted to. But what she wants to do is, her name's Babette, she wants to provide them a feast. Well, in comes this colonel or general who, he's there for this feast. Now, the only way that they agreed to let her cook for them was they all got together, unbeknownst to her, and said, we will not enjoy it. Let her make this feast, we will not enjoy it. Well, they are sitting there refusing to enjoy this, but this colonel or whatever, who said, and he's just going on about this. This is the best food I ever had. The only time I ever had food like this was at this one restaurant in France. Unbeknownst to him, it was the same chef who proposed it. And this was her total gift of self. She spent every last penny just giving them this feast. And then the whole thing breaks down on how, this is the loving self-sacrifice of Babette, who gives herself to these people unconditionally, and the people who are so-called religious or intemperate not getting it, but here is the colonel who's there as a guest who just appreciates it. So, I mean, it's a wonderful story if you could find it anywhere. It's a tough YouTube it, but nonetheless. So temperance is known as the charioteer of the virtues because this is the one that will steer us good or steer us bad. All right? Vice is contrary to temperance, insensibility, intemperance, incontinence, right? So surrendering to evil desires. We have no ability to control ourselves. Brutality and pride. Okay. Those are the four cardinal virtues. What I wanted to do before we end this is I wanted to do something with the Sermon on the Mount. Archbishop Chaput's book, Strangers in a Strange Land, if I remember right, has a wonderful section on the Beatitudes. I could not do justice to it more than he does. But I found some way to at least get it to you. And I always like tying things together. I'm one of these divergent thinkers that can never get what's right in front of me, but I can put three things together and find, sometimes it's wrong. So hopefully I won't be wrong here. But I've tried to fold together parts of Dante, parts of the Beatitudes, and hopefully it makes sense. And I get some of this from reading the Sermon on the Mount, Talbert. So he says there's a twofold ethical aspect. So these are just to the antithesis, thou shalt not. And they become a catalyst for our character formation. And he says they can be used for decision making as long as we maintain that they're in the context of the whole gospel. Let's not pull these apart and try to overanalyze each of them. So things that we could try to work on. Anger. Scripture says, you have heard it said to the men of old, you shall not kill. Whoever kills shall be liable to judgment. But I say, everyone who is angry with his brother, you shall be liable to judgment. Let's just admit, these are tough things, right? I mean, hating, really, that's the same thing as killing? I mean, is that what we're supposed to get from this? So Talbert talks about what's the divine intent. Like, what do you think he was meaning behind this? And what he wants, and he's not trying to break it down, smooth it over, come to the least common denominator, ask the least of us. I think he's just trying to put it into a different context. There should be no broken relationships among us people as God's people, right? I mean, we can't let anger, remember, Satan is the great liar, and he does nothing but divide. That's all he will do. You know, so when I do marriage prep classes, I tell them, you know, it doesn't take much for Satan to get between a husband and a wife. I mean, we all know that. There's little buzzwords, little things that can be said, and before we know it, we're at each other's throat, and he's over in the corner hitting his easy button. And we don't realize that our enemies are not each other. Our enemy is Satan and the demons. And that is not intellectual to people. We're faithful people. So no broken relationships, either that is caused by us or which we fail to restore it when it was our fault. All right. So how can anger, you know, wreak its ugly head in our lives? And think of prudence, and think of family prudence and personal prudence. You know, are we pouting? And we love that, right? I mean, we, you know, beat ourselves up. Do we seek unjust retribution? It is just, right, to do another or do us, but do we want something more than that? Jealousy and envy are often synonyms. Philosophically, they have a little bit of a difference, right? Because we have a jealous God, right? So what does that mean to have a jealous God? Jealousy is I want you for me, right? So that's how we understand that our God is a jealous God. He wants us for him, all right?
Envy is more like you have something that I want.
Yes, and it often has the psychological element that if I can't have it, I want you to suffer with it, right? So think of two kids playing. One has a nice set of blocks made, and the other kid doesn't want the other one playing. Well, if I can't play, they knock the whole thing down. Well, I don't want you to have it. You know, if, you know, I can't have the boy that she's dating, well, then I'm going to make it so that it screws them up, right? So envy always has that other little tinge to it. Any form of prejudice, whether it's, you know, based on ethnicity, skin color. If we oppose forgiveness, like I will not forgive that person. Or if we lack patience, again, strength. Okay, here's your Dante quote, and I'll fill this in. How many living now, chancellors of wrath, shall come to lie here yet in this pigmire, leading a curse to be their aftermath? And I, Master, it would suit my whim to see the wretched scrubbed down. Let me just say, these people, they've created so much turmoil, they're up to their necks in mud. And Dante, by this point, he's starting to see the effects of sin. And he almost gets into it, you know. Like, it would do me good to see this go on and on, right? But nonetheless, he sees. So just think of, like, what do we cause? He's always trying to paint a picture, and there's always what he would call contrapasso, right? Whatever happens on earth, there's something happening in hell or such that's like it. So think of how when we do not, in justice, cause peace, but rather we cause anger, picture how we're all, like, trying to walk through this mud-thick atmosphere. And this is what we've created, right? This is what we've created. I probably should have, rather than the canto, I probably should have put more about it rather than just list it. Okay, lust. You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Talbert says the divine intent here is to avoid the initial, perhaps involuntary response, right? Oh my God, she's beautiful. I mean, there's no will involved, right? These are spontaneous. But the eager longing then, all right, once the movie starts playing in their head, or like young people want to know, how long do I have to think about it before it's a sin? You know, how many seconds go by? They want to look in those terms. So the latter speaks to the intent of desire. Like, am I recognizing that I'm attracted, or now am I starting to almost carnally desire? And then I almost want to covet that person. Did anybody, it's in Spanish. So again, you have to do subtitles, but it's called Simon of the Desert. Has anybody ever seen that movie? It's based on like a real life saint, Simon, who sits on this pillar in the desert. I mean, it's pretty much from its title. And he's an ascetic, so he sits up there. And in the movie, it's fictional. There's all kinds of temptations that come at him. They want him to build him a big, more beautiful pillar for him to stand on. And Satan appears usually in the form of a woman. And she'll try to, like, you know, get him to lust after her and such. And my wife was watching with me. That poor woman's going straight to heaven, some of the things that I make her watch or listen to. But the ending is almost, first of all, this is from the 60s, so you'll get like the go-go music at the end. But what's interesting about it, what I think it works, is that all of a sudden at the very end, Simon finds himself in like a go-go nightclub with this girl. And she's dancing, and he's just sitting there like all sullen smoking a cigarette. In other words, it's like this is just how Satan would tempt us, you know, just in the normal life. I mean, we're not, you know, in other words, they were trying to bring it back to like how would it work for each of us. So anyway, I have no idea why I thought of that. So we lack reason, right? So we have not brought reason to bear on our appetites. Our appetites have ruled our reason, and our temperance, which is supposed to be the charitor, you know, of our appetites, was no longer. So the horses were running wild. We can never escape from worries. This leads to a lack of peace in our souls, and fetishes and sexual deviancies, which I will not start quoting him here. You can only imagine. When I was doing research once on what people search for, like on pornography sites, you can go and like without going on those particular sites and read them. I showed my wife the top 10. I did not know what 6 of them were. I had no idea. And I said, "There's no way. I'm not Googling that." You know. So I mean, it's amazing. You know. This was the canto from Inferno that I already mentioned to you. I came to a place stripped bare of every light, and roaring on the naked dark like seas, racked by aurora winds, their hellish flight. Now you got to remember, there's people just flying through the air. Okay, they're the sexual deviants that had no control of their passions. The hellish flight of storm and counterstorm of time forgone sweeps the souls of the damned before its charge. Whirling and battering, it drives them on. And when they pass the ruined gap of hell, through which we had come, their shrieks become anew. So it's an endless cycle. There they blaspheme the powers of God eternal. And this I learned was the never-ending flight of those who sin in the flesh, the carnal and lusty who betrayed reason to their appetite. Dante, at one point, I thought I had it up here, Virgil says if you call to them, they'll come to you. So he calls for a couple, Francesca and Paolo Malatesta. This couple, the woman was married and was having an adulterous affair with Paolo, and the husband drove a sword through both of them while they were in the act. So for all eternity, they fly by each other with no control. So he calls them over, Francesca, Paolo. I was teaching some young people once, explaining to them that this is the first level of hell, because this is of sin against temperance, which is the lower of the virtues. They took refuge in that. Well, this is not that bad of hell. I said, okay, you did get the fact that it was in hell, right? I mean, we did start there. It wasn't like, it's the more air conditioning part of it. You know? Adultery. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, if you divorce your wife, except for the grounds of unchastity, or they say unlawful marriage, it makes her an adulteress. If you marry a divorced woman, then therefore they too commit adultery. This one you will struggle with if you haven't already in your ministries. Because, I didn't grow up in a bubble, but I only knew one person who was divorced growing up, and they weren't in my end. And today, you know, not only, like I know when I taught young people, not only were they not divorced, we're talking 2 or 3 removed, and there might be 5 kids from 3 different dads living with one who's a father to none. So when you bring this up, what do they hear? My mom's going to hell. That's all they hear. It doesn't matter how you want to spin it, that's all they hear. It becomes a very difficult thing to talk about. And then what does that mean for them? Did you see the video of the young boy who went to Pope Francis last week and
Yeah.
said, my father's an atheist and he died and I'm afraid he's in hell? He started crying. Pope Francis, I think, said that God has the heart of a father. Is that how he said it?
Yeah, he said that your father, even though he was an atheist, he loved you enough to have all his children baptized.
Oh.
And that God is our Father, and He has that type of love. And he said that, you know, he felt that God would love this young boy's
Yeah.
father.
Yeah. What nice advice. I read, I don't know if anybody knows of the website Quora. It's like a question. Yeah, I go on it a bit. There's all kinds of questions and all different disciplines, and you can answer to it. Well, I read one. Someone said, if you're an atheist, you know, that works in a hospital and a young person's dying and they ask, will I go to heaven? Aren't you a hypocrite if you say yes? Well, the one response of an atheist was perfect. Like, what kind of sicko do you think I am? You know, even though she was mocking God, I don't believe in your pie in the sky religion, but do you think I'm going to tell a small child? I mean, you know, it's not even a matter of, you know, do I change my belief, but what do I do there? You're not going to fix, you know, her point was, do you think I'm going to convince this individual that the spaghetti monster is real? It's not the point of that thing, but anyway. Do you have something?
Yeah, and my wife was talking about that same video, and she said some of the critique was that the Pope was not, you know, confronting, like, atheism, and I'm like, the kid was probably about 8 years old. I mean, you know, it's just...
Is that the time to do catechesis?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, of all the shenanigans that go on in our world, in our church,
Yeah.
they're worried about these things. But, so, Talbert says the divine intent here is obviously to not violate another's spouse, but to not violate them in any form or fashion. Right? So coveting could be even with the eyes. Adultery is something that involves and violates the whole person. So you know how it is. We joke sometimes that we have work wives, right? Because they make fun of us as like our wives do, and you have a good rapport with them, and that's nice. It's a good, you know, nice situation to have. But when you find yourself sharing things with someone you might work with that, you know, usually you would only share with your spouse, then you're starting to wonder, you know, am I going into an area here where I'm falling into this? So fantasies of the mind and heart. This could include abandoning the faith, thwarted discretion, broken promises, misguided love. I used to tell young people, you know, you're going to have some situation when you're like, your boyfriend invites you over because you thought the parents are going to be there and you realize they're gone for the weekend. And you're pretty sure he has one thing on his mind and you don't know how to get out of the situation. I said, you should have a get out way. You know, you got to order pizza, or your dad, I mean, you have to have something. Well, but I think it'd be more Christian if I could sit there and be a witness to him and I'll remain pure and I'm there. I'm like, that's very nice. I guarantee you hormones win every single time. That's how it works. I mean, everybody will walk into that situation saying it's different with me, and then all of a sudden it's not different. Get yourself out of the nearness of that temptation, because it could be overwhelming. All right. Oh, I did have this up. Okay, I saved that one for this. And he to me, this is, you know, Virgil saying, watch them. When they pass next, call to them in the name of love that drives and damns this here. If you call them by that name, they'll stop. Love which permits no loved one not to love took me so strongly delight in him that we are one in hell. So this is the person who had an adulterous affair, Francesca and Paolo. Love led us to one death. Now obviously love is not the love we're understanding. Now in the depths of hell, pain awaits for him who took our lives. This was the piteous tale they stopped to tell. So it's like, and he meets people he knows there. He meets cardinals, he meets popes, he meets all kinds of people down there. And if you do, if you want to like spread gossip, or if you're a brown noser in life, you get to swim in that when you're down there. You get to swim in it, and he really puts people that are brown nosers or flatterers, he puts them pretty low because they're using intellect. I mean, this isn't just temptation of the flesh; they're manipulating. So a person who always one of the brown nosers, there's other aspects of it. There's almost this holy water font. It's almost like a mocking of baptism, where they go head first into it, and the next person puts their head into them, you know what, and the next person puts their head into what, and that's how it goes down, and that's how they spend eternity. I mean, he's quite colorful in how he plays this out. Try to sign that one, sister. Save Billy's innocence. Again, you have heard it said, you shall not swear falsely, but perform to the Lord what you have sworn. I say to you, do not swear at all. Talbert says the divine intent here is not to simply stop people from pledging oaths, but to not treat one's relation with God in an empty and unproductive way. How many times do we make promises, right? I mean, you know, and then as soon as we're feeling better, we kind of forget that. My wife, her Lenten fast was to not complain. She did very good. She fell twice. I don't even bother with that one. There's no sense even making that kind of deal. I won't get through the day one. But so we can ask ourselves underneath this, do our words line up with our actions? Do we overextend ourselves? Yes. We always say yes to many things, and we wind up doing everything half-baked because we don't have enough time in our lives. Do we lose willingness? Are we conscious of our vows, whether it be married, religious, or priestly? Are we afraid? I mean, does fear paralyze us sometimes? Are we morally immature? I mean, there's nothing wrong, right, with, I used to be into powerlifting and all kinds of weightlifting, and that's great. But if we're doing that in place of our spiritual thing, that's where it becomes a problem, right? That's where it becomes a problem. Retaliation. You heard it say an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, if someone strikes you in the right cheek, turn the other to him also. So this is not just about receiving retribution, but maybe we're being called to refrain from retaliation, even when it's just to do so. Interesting. I don't know. This says something about the human person. I was listening to NPR on the way here, and they were talking about how robotic warfare is on the rise, and especially in Russia, and they're afraid that, you know, we already have many things that are robotic instruments in terms of missile defense and such. But they're saying this particular guy was a sniper with the Army Rangers during one of the Gulf Wars. And he had said, you know, with all the technology from the driverless cars and such, how will they apply this into warfare? This is now his specialty. And he said the problem is that they're afraid that what's going to happen is there will be these flashpoints where humans will have to quickly clean up what the machine could not discern. There was no prudence there. And he said, for instance, he said, an enemy combatant, there's no age limit on an enemy combatant. It's their actions determine whether or not they are combatants. He said when he was in Afghanistan as a sniper unit, he said this young 7-year-old girl would come out, We were staring at her, she was staring at us. She would leave, and then the Taliban showed up. Now, we took them out, but he said, nobody ever said, take her out, even though we figured that's what she was doing. He said, we can make those on-the-gut decisions right then and there to not retaliate. He says, I'm worried, and that says something between us and the machine. The machine's programmed that this is the definition of, and I'm being very simplistic, of an enemy combatant. Will it make that type of assumption? So anyway, there was a refrain from retaliation. Are we vengeful? Are we power hungry? Do we lack forgiveness? Are we prone to cruelty? Do we lack a genuine sense of justice, or do we only like justice applied to help us? Do we like playing the victim? The gloom, despair, and agony on me. Some of you know what that is. Are we faithless? I think, is that it?
There's one more.
One more, okay. You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. It's not just about loving in a narrow way, but we have to extend that to those people where love is difficult and challenging. I was reading Martin Luther King Jr. He said beautifully, we have to do, and this is what we should do as Christians, we have to do better than to love our enemies. We have to make sure our enemies know we love them. That's a different thing. And that's hard. Because, some people hurt you very badly. I have people hurt me very badly. You want to spit at them. You don't want to. It's hard enough to love them, let alone let them know that you love them. So do we allow others to love us? Do we avoid difficult people to love? Has hope been diminished in our lives? Have we become numb? Do we take pleasure in other people's loneliness? They had that coming to them. You treat people like dirt, enjoy all your friends. Do we reach out to the marginalized and those that are hated? Again, I think that's the bottom line with us in the Christian world. We've got to find the modern day prostitutes and tax collectors. And we have to be around them to the point where people are scandalized by why are we there, I think. Do we put ourselves before others, and do we love ourselves? Okay. That's it for this.